Susan back with us, a former member of this panel up here, so welcome.
Thank you.
She's a liaison for the city council. As we call this meeting to order, the first thing would be the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would all stand, please join me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's okay. On tonight's agenda, we have the consent agenda. We have 3 public hearings, Unified Development Code Tax Amendment, public hearing, the vacation of Hannah's Place. We have a public hearing on the vacation of Colonial Gardens First Plat on Wyatt Road. And then we'll also hear a plan development, final plan and site plan review at the same time. Other business, and we will adjourn for the day. Before the call the order for the first public hearing, we'll open the public hearing and call for the exhibits from the city attorney, and the applicant will make a presentation. Witnesses in favor, witnesses opposed, and then I'll bring it back up to up here for any comments from the Planning Commission. And then if it's approved, it'll be at the city planning meeting on May the 7th of 28. Open the public hearing on the Unified Development Code Tax Amendment.
Chairman Haney, I offer the following exhibits into the record. Exhibit 1, staff report with attachments. Exhibit 2, affidavit of publication in the Examiner on April 7, 2018. Exhibit 3, application with attachments. Exhibit 4, Title IV Land Use Section, Blue Springs Code of Ordinance by reference. And Exhibit 5, 2014 Comprehensive Plan by reference.
We'll hear from the city. Mike was going to lead us off.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Mike Mallon, Assistant Director of Community Development for the City of Blue Springs. And I'll be making staff's presentation for these proposed Unified Development Code amendments. The amendments being brought forward tonight are in relation to the above-ground storage of flammable liquids. There's been a desire to loosen the regulations that are in place currently for the above-ground storage of flammable liquids, and specifically tanks for those for the storage of those. Currently in the city code, municipal code, under section, pardon me one second, section 500.140, the above ground storage of flammable liquids, class 1, 2, and 3A liquids is expressly prohibited under the municipal code. So the one of the amendments that we will be taking forward in conjunction with this, but is not a part of the Unified Development Code, and therefore is not under the purview of this board, is that amendment to the municipal code. The amendments to the Unified Development Code, which are before you, are to provide regulations for the above ground storage of flammable liquids now that or should that prohibition be amended and removed by the City Council. Specifically, as staff has written these, I'm going to run through the proposed language, and then I'll also discuss the Development Advisory Commission's recommendations and then staff's recommendation to those. The Development Advisory Commission met on April 13th of 2018 to review the proposed language, and they recommended, or they voted in favor of those or recommended approval of those with some additional staff research to be done in between the time of that meeting and before we brought that forward to this commission here this evening. That additional research I'll discuss in a minute has been included in staff's recommendation. So Based upon the assumption that the municipal code is amended to remove the prohibition of above-ground storage tanks for flammable liquids, class 1, 2, and 3A, which is gas, diesel, and kerosene, liquids of that type that are flammable. We're not talking about propane tanks here. So in order to provide regulations for those, staff has proposed to create a new non-residential accessory use and amend section 405-060 under accessory uses. As you will see, that text section is highlighted here. It's a little difficult to read. Let me bring this up here. Under accessory uses are uses that are incidental to or secondary to a principal use located on a lot. So staff is proposing to create a new non-residential accessory use, which means this accessory use could only be used in a non-residential situation or as an accessory use to a non-residential principal use. As you can see here, staff is proposing to create a new accessory use, the above-ground tanks for the storage of flammable liquids. And then subject to section 405-0607, or A7, which would be a new section proposed to be added, which provides the regulations for these above-ground tanks. As you can read, I'll just read this verbatim so that everybody is clear. Above-ground tanks for the storage of flammable liquids. The above-ground storage of flammable liquids shall be allowed as an accessory use to only those principal uses listed under section 411-030H, which are the industrial use groups, in accordance with the following standards. So that first sentence is basically stating that these above-ground tanks can only be accessory to a principal industrial use, and then those industrial uses can be located throughout the city on property that is appropriately zoned for that industrial use. So if there are no industrial use, you can't have this above-ground tank as an accessory without the industrial use. Along those same lines, if the principal industrial use ceases for any reason for a period of more than 12 consecutive months, then the above-ground tank for the storage of flammable liquids that is accessory to that principal use needs to go away as well. We're also, there's a section under the municipal code, section 500-140, that allows currently for temporary tanks that are associated with construction activities. And since we're removing the prohibition entirely from section 5 or chapter 500, we're taking that temporary provision and rolling it over into this new section that outlines all the regulations. We thought the best way to handle this was to have all the rest regulations self-contained, and then that way there's one place to go look for all the regulations pertaining to these, rather than putting them in different parts of the Unified Development Code. So currently, above-ground tanks not exceeding 250 gallons may be permitted on premises zoned for or used for heavy industrial, light industrial, agricultural, or construction sites not to exceed 100, or the current regulation is 90 days. We're proposing to increase that to 180 days. In terms of location and size, staff has written this language to state that all above-ground storage tanks shall be in accordance with all applicable building and fire codes as adopted by the city. The International Fire Code, the city is currently under the 2012 International Fire Code, is adopted by the city, provides minimum separation requirements between tanks, minimum separation requirements between a tank and a building, minimum separation between a tank and a property line, minimum separation between a tank and a fuel dispensing pump based upon the size of those tanks. And so staff believes or wrote this language to refer back to those fire code regulations rather than imposing a separate setback or building separation. We felt it was best to have it comply with the fire code regulations for the public's health, safety, and welfare, and didn't want to be in conflict with those. In addition, under section 411-030, we have provided a description or almost a definition of what an above-ground tank for the storage of flammable liquids is. And so that would be in addition to section 411030H. Above-ground tanks for the storage of flammable liquids are a self-contained above-ground facility or tank structure for the storage of Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3A flammable liquids as defined by the International Fire Code adopted by the city. Again, those classes, Class 1, 2, and 3A are diesel, gasoline, and other combustible liquids such as kerosene. As I mentioned previously, the Development Advisory Commission recommended approval of the amendments on April 13th. They did have some requests for additional staff research prior to the Planning Commission meeting. Specifically, they asked staff to research whether the temporary maximum size tank of 250 gallons, whether that was up to date with current industry standards. And so staff reached out to a number of companies and inquired as to what size tank they most commonly rent out or are asked to rent out on a temporary basis for a construction site. And they said that 500 gallons was by far the most commonly requested. Almost 75% of all the requests to rent a temporary tank for a construction purpose was at 500 gallons. They did indicate that there were some instances where a larger tank, such as 1,000 gallons, may be requested, but those are more for larger construction site, larger subdivision, multiple acres, whereas such a large tank would be needed. There was also some discussion during the DAC meeting, though it was not a formal recommendation, to also include agriculture, so that temporary tanks could be used in a farming operation. Under the Unified Development Code, there is the use of agriculture limited, which pertains to the farming of land for row crops on a much larger scale than would be like a community garden or something like that. So staff looked at that as well. The staff recommendation, staff recommends approval of the proposed UDC amendments to allow above-ground tanks for the storage of flammable liquids as accessory uses to principal industrial land uses, as I previously mentioned, and agriculture limited land uses, as I just mentioned, as well as building or construction contractor with machinery, equipment, or storage land uses. One of the specific requests to allow these larger tanks, we took a deeper look at what his use would fall under in our code and determined that that would best fall under this building or construction contractor land use, which is an industrial use. And so the staff is recommending that we include that use as well as a principal land use to which these tanks could be accessory to. Any new above-ground tanks would need to comply with all applicable fire codes and building codes and would require building permits through the city. The city is still trying to outline and finalize in conjunction with the Central Jackson County or Fire Protection District how to exactly permit that and how to coordinate inspections of that, because these tanks have been prohibited since 1994. We don't have a process in place, but we are working to do that and should have that finalized by the time this goes before City Council, which is scheduled for May 7th. Staff believes that by requiring these above-ground tanks in an accessory nature, it'll allow for greater flexibility to help businesses benefit from having the on-site storage of above-ground fuel, while at the same time limiting the locations of these in certain portions of the city with appropriate land uses, as well while at the same time ensuring compliance with public health, safety, and welfare. In addition to those uses, adding the agriculture limited land use and the building or construction contractor land use, staff recommends increasing the size of the temporary tank from 250 gallons to 500 gallons with a provision that allows for larger tanks than 500 gallons as determined by the community development director. As I mentioned earlier, some development projects, such as a large subdivision, multiple acres, 50, 60, up to 100 acres, may require a larger tank, and therefore a 1,000-gallon tank could be deemed appropriate for that project. However, a smaller construction project on an infill lot that's surrounded by existing adjacent development, it may not be appropriate to have a 1,000-gallon tank at that site due to the surrounding development. And so 500 gallons would be allowed, but any request for larger than that would have to be determined and approved by the community development director based upon the location of that property, the size of the development, and other criteria as deemed appropriate. Staff believes that this increase in the temporary tank size is appropriate to keep up with industry standards for construction projects. These temporary tanks are a integral feature oftentimes in the functional construction operations of a development project, kind of from the beginning to the end, and so allowing these larger tanks will benefit the construction industry. In addition, staff is recommending to increase the number of the time period in which these would be permitted from 90 days to 180 days. That 180 days is proposed to be at one time, in that you can get a 6-month allowance for a temporary tank. After that 6-month expires, you can then apply for a new 6-month period. We're not thinking of 6 months within a 12-month period, and then you're done for 6 months, and then you have to wait another, then you have to come back every 6 months. So it's, and the goal of that is to make sure that these tanks are being used continually in order to be allowed, but also to be responsive to the needs of the construction operators and the development process. Those are staff recommendations and the DAC recommendations. So we recommend the language as contained with the Development Advisory Committee recommendation, as well as staff's recommendation to increase the size to 500 gallons, increase the size, the amount of time from 90 to 180 days, and the provisions to allow these above ground tanks as accessory uses to principal industrial uses, agriculture limited uses, and building and construction contractor uses. That is the conclusion of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Are there any witnesses in the audience in favor of this?
Ask questions first.
Have any question?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Mallon, I'm not sure I'm going to phrase this correctly, but is there a specific reason why the council is wanting to look at this at this point? I mean, is there a developer who's come to us and said, hey, we want to do this? I'm concerned, frankly, I'm concerned about having these tanks out there at all. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, what is the motivation behind all of this? And is there anything, you're talking about putting a tank in a subdivision as it's being developed. Once that subdivision starts to become occupied, are we risking those new inhabitants of that subdivision?
Okay. And two-part questions. I'll answer the first one first, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yes, there has been. There was a gentleman who owns a construction business who wanted to put one of these above-ground tanks in, and was told that there was a flat prohibition against them, except on a temporary basis, based upon the ordinance that was adopted in 1994. There are some that are in the city, as More Oil, which is just across the street downtown, as well as some others down off of 40 Highway and Industrial. And those were likely grandfathered in or put in place before that prohibition came about. So there are properties that do have these tanks. And the request of the contractor and subsequently City Council had asked staff to look into creating regulations that would allow these in a limited fashion throughout the city to be able to help accommodate the construction business and serve the businesses of the city. The request for a larger temporary tank and time frame was a result of the Development Advisory Commission discussion and meeting, and one of the members brought up the concept that 250 gallons may be an out-of-date number, and based upon, and directed staff to do some research into that, and based upon our research, we did find that a 250-gallon tank is pretty small and is not often used. So a combination of both developer request and city council request to look at loosening these regulations. In terms of how these tanks would be interact with a subdivision as it progresses during the construction process, there are the International Fire Code regulations that would ensure that it is a minimum distance from any occupied building, that it's a minimum distance from a property line, that has safeguard measures, if you will, and this is just one of the examples. I'm not, verbatim versed on the fire code, but there are provisions for containment and spillage that keep, if the tank leaks, it keeps all the fuel in close proximity to that tank, doesn't let it spread out, thereby, reducing the effect of a fire should it happen. So staff would be relying on those public safety codes as determined by the fire department.
Has there been any discussion with either of the fire districts in this, as addressing this code?
Yes.
Whether they're okay with it or not?
Yeah, they permit them currently. If a property within unincorporated city limits were to request one, they would be allowed to do so under the fire code, provided they meet specific stipulations for the installation of that tank, whether or not they were in the city limits. So we did reach out to Central Jackson County. We did not reach out to Prairie Township, but they both are under the same fire code. And typically the fire code does not say what you can and can't do. It says if you want to do this, it then gives you all of the regulations by which you need to comply in order to do that. And so we met with the fire department, or the Central Jackson County, and the City of Blue Springs building staff last week, and they were in support of this ordinance in terms of the way it was structured and how we were going to be allowing them, and agreed to work with us in the implementation of these new regulations and how to permit them and inspect them and to make sure that they're being done in a safe manner.
Okay.
Next question. Before I take another question, does anyone in the audience have opposed to this public hearing? Okay. I'll take
Okay.
Madam Head.
I'm curious whether or not some of the automobile dealers would want to have this type of a tank, and also whether or not Colonial Gardens might like to have it for their agritourism business. And then how many extensions to the 6-month temporary permit would be granted.
Pardon me, I'm just jotting these down so I don't lose track. To the first question regarding auto sales or similar uses, we had that same concern, and that's why we wrote the code to make these tanks be accessory, and then only as accessory to industrial uses as defined in the Unified Development Code. A automobile dealership does not fall under an industrial use, and so therefore it could not be done. Along those same lines, staff had concerns about a convenience store or other general retail operation, like a gas station, wanting to put in these above ground tanks. And again, because we've limited to them being accessory to principal industrial uses or agriculture limited or a building contractor, that would not be permitted to be accessory to a general retail business such as a convenience store. As far as gardens, if part of the uses that they have on the property does include agriculture limited as a land use, which I believe it does, a portion of that site is deemed to have agriculture limited land uses, then they would be allowed to have a temporary tank. In terms of the number of extensions, Staff believes that that is, would be almost a self-policing type thing, whereas if there's no construction activity going on the site, there really isn't the need for the contractor to have an above-ground tank out on the property and continue to be paying to rent it on there if there's no construction activity. So it would be, deemed to be allowed as long as the construction process continues. I can see a concern that if construction on a subdivision delays for 5 years or something like that, if a builder goes away, I believe that the provision that says if the principal industrial use goes away too, we could use that provision. If the construction ceases for a time period of, say, 12 months, then staff could say that that temporary tank needs to go as well under that provision.
Is there,
Mr. Mallon, could we discuss the original prohibition from 1994, kind of the background around that, if you have that information, if there was any incidents or anything that caused that prohibition to go through?
We could try. I was a sophomore in high school, so I was not. But I do believe that, I don't know the exact history, and so anything I state would be a guess, but my guess is prohibitions like that usually come about because of the desire to stop something that is either happening or is being requested to happen. And so there was some, people have been trying to replay that history over the past couple of weeks since this came about, and we believe, but don't quote me on it, that there was a request to do kind of an above-ground fuel gas station, if you will, similar to kind of More Oil, which is downtown. And so this prohibition could have been put into effect to prevent that from happening, but I don't know the exact origination of this.
so anybody else have a quick?
Yeah, quick question. From like a benchmarking perspective, do we know what our neighboring communities have in regards to this being allowed or prohibited, or just if you can speak on that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We did reach out to, if you remember, this kind of discussion item was before the this discussion item was before the Development Advisory Committee back in February. And at the time, staff had reached out to the Mid-American Regional Council to get some information. We heard back from a handful, which didn't give us a lot of great information. So this time we specifically reached out to Independence and Lee's Summit directly. In each of those two cities, both of whom have their own fire department under their jurisdiction, they have adopted the international fire codes with local amendments. Our city has not done that because we do not have a fire department. We rely on Central Jackson County. In their local amendments, they say above ground tanks are prohibited except under, they're allowed in non-residential areas as part of a construction project. So they do have allowances for them as long as they are part of a construction project and in non-residential areas.
Are there any other questions, comments?
So,
Commissioner Billups.
I'm sorry, I'm seeing this as an attractive nuisance sort of situation where you're just inviting somebody to
Challenge it.
pull a prank and end up with an explosion. You say the Independence and Lee Summit codes right now do not allow it. They allow it on a construction site, but not in a residential zoning or not in a residential area. So again, if somebody's building a subdivision, is that a construction site or is that a residential area? Where does that fall?
That's a good question. It probably
To me,
falls-
it's a residential area as soon as somebody moves into the first house. And at that point, I would not want to have a house that was anywhere near an above-ground tank.
Okay.
Just because that tank is going to be unguarded at night. And again, somebody's going to get a bright idea that they're going to be, going to pull a prank. And we're going to end up with a big explosion.
Okay.
So
That is a valid concern. I don't know if I have a perfect answer for that right now.
Are there any other questions, Commissioner?
So this investigation was the result of one builder making a request, even though we have multiple builders that have not made that request in the past?
Which portion of the request? The request to remove the prohibition or the request to increase the size of the temporary tanks?
Remove the prohibition.
This is a request of a business, a contractor, building or construction contractor business, who would like to have these on his property so that he can fuel up his vehicles in the morning, and then they can go out to the site and then come back at night, thereby saving a step in the travel process. This one, we're bringing this forward at this time because we have one that we know of. There may have been others that have come in and talked to city staff over the last 20 years and inquired about these permanent above-ground tanks, and we would have given them the response that they're prohibited. However, at this time, this individual made a request at City Council, and staff was directed to look at the possibility of loosening the regulations, and so that's what we've brought forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments?
I'm sorry.
Commissioner Burley.
I'm still again trying to wrap around this. What kind of form does a tank like this take? Is this like a trailer that's just sitting on a site somewhere, or still on wheels where somebody could hook up to it and pull it off, or
In the temporary situation or the permanent situation?
in any situation?
In a permanent situation, there are very strict fire code regulations that say it has to be anchored a certain way into the ground. It has to have minimum tank protection, such as bollards, or actually put in almost like a basin. So if you picture like a cylinder or a water bottle put into a shoebox that was about the same size to contain it. And so it's a very permanent thing that they put in. On a temporary basis, it comes in on a skid that can then be, it's not something that is on wheels or something like that. They're pretty much delivered to the site, from my understanding, and left there, and then the delivery vehicle takes off. My understanding is also that the fuel companies that fill these also have fuel tanker trucks, which often go out to the sites to fill these up and/or fill up the equipment. And so temporary ones are a little bit more just that, temporary, but I don't believe they're on wheels, or that somebody with and I believe they're rather heavy, so I don't believe somebody with just an F-10 pickup truck can drag one off.
And I'm having I guess I don't really grasp, how large is a 500-gallon tank? I mean, is it the size of a small car or a pickup truck, or?
I have some pictures that I can give you some examples of what they look like. Bear with me for a moment.
You've seen those that are on stands.
These are the one example of the tanks, and I have another one here. That one. That one. So here are some pictures of above ground tanks that we're looking at. These are permanent installations. Don't know the exact size on these, but the first picture I did bring up, this I believe is the 2,000-gallon tank, and this would be a 500-gallon tank.
I wish there was something next to it to give you a sense of scale, like a person or a vehicle or something.
The measurements that they provided on these other pages, 2,000-gallon tank, I'm sorry, this is to the side, I'll flip it this way. It's approximately 5.5 feet tall by 12 feet in length. For a 2,000-gallon tank, a 500-gallon tank is 4 feet tall, approximately 6 feet in
6
length.
foot by 4 foot.
You have on there over $500 or 500-gallon tank has to be approved by yourself. Is that right?
The community development director, whoever is serving in that position at the time of when
Because
these.
there's a farming operation that's quite large and, they could use 500 gallon in a day easily. So I'm sure they're going to be asking for, they already have larger tanks.
And those would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis in conjunction with the fire department and building department, but also looking at things that staff uses other determinations in the code for other land uses, such as is it compatible with existing development in the area. And on a larger site, it's probably going to be more compatible to have a larger tank than if we were to just have up the temporary tank all the way up to 1,000. And then have that come in on a site that's really not appropriate for that, such as a smaller infill site or a pad site or something like that. So we were trying to allow some flexibility while at the same time increasing the size.
Mr. Chairman, what kind of safety precautions are going to be around this to keep would-be vandals out from trying to play a prank or blow it up or whatever they might choose to do?
Safety precautions would be under the International Fire Code provision. They include automatic shutoff provisions. There's a lot of very technical stuff in the fire code, such as shut off hardware, things like if you drive off at the gas station with the handle still inserted in your car, it rips the hose off, but then the tank shuts off immediately. Or if you run over a tank, there's provisions to shut it off, and those are all stipulated in the fire code, and there would be those types of provisions to maintain a minimum level of safety.
Is there going to be like any fencing or anything to keep people away from it?
There are provisions, again, in the fire code that may require fencing depending on how they want to install it. We are not proposing any type of other kind of fencing or screening because those could become in direct conflict with a fire code. Should we require from a planning perspective, we like to screen things with a solid wood fence or something like that in landscaping. But as you can imagine, those are both combustible items that would then make a situation like that worse. But any kind of fencing or bollards or security requirements would be contained and reviewed as part of the fire code approval.
Are there any other questions? Anybody have? Okay. Okay. Huh? Yeah, roll call vote.
Mr. Haney, if I may, since it's a public hearing, you do have someone who wishes to speak in favor of.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't see you over the top of this.
Yeah, I'm tucked down here. You do have someone who wishes to speak in favor of.
Okay.
I need to be sworn in, please.
You have to be.
You solemnly swear to tell us the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes. Yeah, I didn't actually come to speak to this issue, but a lot of the questions you're asking I could answer just as a business person in the community. So your questions around, security.
Closer to the microphone.
Oh, you can't hear? Okay. So questions around security or whatever, just so everybody's on the same page. Any semi truck sitting on the road or parked anywhere, that has 300 gallons of fuel on it, right? The 2 tanks on the sides, they're generally not locked. Any construction equipment that you see sitting around, those are going to carry just on that unit 300 to 500 gallons of fuel. So like a big tractor that's pulling a big scraper you see at the developments, they're going to burn 20 to 30 gallons of fuel per hour. So any construction site that you see 5 or 8 pieces of equipment sitting there, they need a 2,000 gallon tank so that they can fuel every day. Those are really common. So as a business owner, you want to make sure that your fuel is there and it's secured so that it doesn't get stolen, right? Any business owner, the number one thing that they're focused on not having stolen is fuel because it's really easy to steal. And there's a few fuel companies that run this service, Hample Oil, Carter Energy, there's several around, and can you imagine being in that business from a liability standpoint? So these people are very, very careful that their temporary fuel containment units meet all the specifications, and that they have measures to ensure that they don't have power available to pump the fuel, that they lock so that people don't steal the fuel. This isn't stuff that I really enjoy, but I've operated in this world a lot. Any facility that has a lot of off-road equipment generally will always have a fuel tank. So I'd almost guarantee if we went to the Blue Springs Country Club, they got a fuel tank there, right? Because they got all the mowers that like you and I, we go to the gas station and fill up a 5-gallon gas tank, and it lasts us a while. The golf course, not so much. Rental companies, there's a lot of places that I'm sure have fuel tanks that were either grandfathered in, or they just didn't think to ask for a permit or whatever. It's usually off-road equipment that you have. So anyway, I don't know if sharing any of that helps. I don't necessarily have a dog in the fight, but since I knew answers, I figured I'd share them with y'all. And if I wanted to know more, I would certainly reach out to Carter Energy or Hampel Oil. Somebody represented from that company could come in. I'm sure they know everything about fuel on job sites or fuel in this situation, because it's a really, really big business having this fuel available. And from a safety standpoint, I would tell you, I think it's much safer to have a very safe truck delivering the fuel and having it in a safe storage on the site, rather than going out to get fuel over and over in a truckload quantity, because now the fuel's moving in a tank on a truck, a smaller truck, up and down the road all the time. So anyway, but again, back to the point on the neighborhood, there's 1,000+ gallons of fuel just sitting there in the tanks in the equipment that's sitting there, and a lot of times that's not locking, so it's probably more available for vandalism or whatever. Anyway, thank you.
We need your name and address, please.
Oh, my name is Tory Swope, TORY, and I live at 2404 Northeast Lake Breeze Drive, Lee Summit, Missouri.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Is there anyone else have any comments or anything to make? I'll close the hearing, public hearing on the commission, and there'll be, is there any other additional comments to be made by anybody before? There will be a roll call. Roll call vote on it, and it will go to the...
Need a motion?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess we need to vote. Do we need a motion first? Or comments or whatever?
Commissioner Haney.
Yes, sir.
Or I mean Chairman Haney.
Yeah, madam.
I would recommend approval of UDCT-04- or I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval for UDCT-04-18-6342.
So here a second. Second by Commissioner Duhon.
With staff conditions, right.
With staff conditions,
Right,
yes.
in the memo, that are specified in the memo. Ginger, you second?
Yes.
Okay, roll call vote.
Roll call vote, please.
Planning Commissioner Casey,
No.
Commissioner Graham,
Aye.
Commissioner Fairbanks,
No.
Commissioner Sanderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Duhon,
Aye.
Commissioner Billups,
No.
Chairman Haney.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
That will go to the Planning Commission on May the 7th.
City Council.
City Council.
City Council, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we'll hear a public hearing on the vacation at Hannah's Place. And staff, Mike?
Go ahead and open it.
I open the public hearing on vacation at Hannah's Place. On plats lot, or 10 and 4, please.
Mr. Chairman, I offer the following exhibits into the record. Exhibit 1, staff report with attachments. 2, affidavit of publication in the Examiner on April 7, 2018. 3, application with attachments. 4, 185-foot notification map. 5, names and addresses of property owners within 185 feet of the site. 6, copy of the letter sent to said property owners. 7, Title IV Land Use Section Blue Springs Code of Ordinances by reference. And 8, 2014 Comprehensive Plan by reference.
Okay, staff will give their comments on it.
All right.
Ma'am?
Thank you, Chairman Haney and Commissioners. Before you this evening is a request to vacate a portion of a platted drainage and utility easement and a 20-foot build line along the Walnut Street frontage of lots 10 through 14 in Hannah's Place second plat. Dwellings by Design KC is currently developing the second plat of Hannah's Place and has been faced with the challenge of accommodating their standard building footprint, building footprint depths, and adequate driveway lengths. Having a minimum 20-foot building setback limits the rear driveway lengths to less than 18 feet, which cannot accommodate extended cab vehicles, which does present issues in keeping the shared access drive between all the lots clear. Although the Downtown Development Code only requires a 10-foot front setback along Walnut Street, a 20-foot front setback was established since a 20-foot drainage and utility easement was platted on the front of the lot. At the time of platting, drainage infrastructure was planned to be installed within that 20-foot easement. However, the drainage infrastructure was ultimately moved to the rear of the lots as part of the additional drainage easement located on the north side of the lots in the shared access drive. Vacating the north 10 feet of the south 20-foot easement along Walnut Street and the building line will allow the houses to be shifted closer to the street, which will help still meet the setbacks and accommodate the desired driveway lengths in the rear. The proposed vacation will not impact any adjacent properties. Staff has also received letters from all public utilities consenting to the vacation, as they currently do not have any utilities within the portion of the easement that is requested to be vacated. The Downtown Review Board did recommend approval of the vacation request at their April 10th meeting, and staff does recommend approval of the vacation subject to the 2 conditions in the staff report. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. So, does the applicant like to come forward and speak?
You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Hi, Mike Yancic, Dwellings by Design, KC. Yeah, as Matt said, we're basically here to just for the driveway lengths, as we have a couple different floor plans. We have one that has a bathroom towards the rear that puts on an additional 4 or 5 feet onto the house, and that's where we're struggling to maintain a 20-foot driveway length. So we're just asking to eliminate the 10 feet of that drainage easement that we do not need anymore, which gets us closer to the already the 10-foot building line that's already in place, which I don't know if that made a whole lot of sense, but we're just trying to move the houses up 5 feet, basically, is what we're trying to do.
Is there any questions of the applicant? Mr. Bowles?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe I have a conflict, but I do want it known on the record that I am a member of an LLC of a property within the 185 feet notification area. So I want that on the record. Okay. And I do have a question too. Are you planning on moving all of the houses up to that 10-foot line, or are they going to be staggered a little bit? Or?
It's actually going to be more like we'll be 15 feet, so we don't need the whole 10 feet. We just need 5, but yeah, we plan on lining them all up so they looked the same going across the front.
Okay.
Can you please tell us your address?
It is 1909 Northwest 75th Street, KCMO 64151.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Either way.
Okay.
Is there anyone in the audience in favor of this? I see none. Is there anybody opposed? Would you come forward to the... Give your name and address, please.
You okay?
Andrea Goebel, 803 Southwest Walnut Street, Blue Springs, 64015. This has been the most upsetting mess to my property. I've lived on that spot since 1989. It was a nice little place to live. And now I've got all this mess behind me and all this mess beside me. I've had groundhogs every time they move dirt come over and dig holes in under my porch. The city, through the Minor Home Repair Program, helped fill those. But I, again, have holes from those critters coming over. 2 of the driveways that were put in at different times, house number 3 and house number 5, directly north of me. One of them ran into my redbud tree, the only privacy I had back there. Within a year or 2, it was busted at the bottom and I had no more tree. On the 5th property, when they was messing with the concrete, and I went out and tried to stop the guys, he was pushing his little vehicle into my fence. I've got tore up fence there. It's been horrible. My house rattles. This has been going on for however long that first one went in on whatever that street is that's north of me. And I had a list of things that I wanted to say, and I didn't know whether I was going to be able to say anything. I also have more water in my crawl space than we had in the flood of '93. We lived there in the flood of '93 and did not have the amount of water in the crawl space that we had our last big amount of watering. I'm also concerned about my property value. I'm also concerned because my driveway, my house is not sitting on the curb or close to the curb on Walnut. Then when I back out of my driveway, those houses west of me are going to be a blind spot. Even though it's 25 miles an hour, people fly through there. And I'm concerned about not being able to see and getting hit. I apologize for not being able to keep myself under composure, but this has really been very traumatic for me because this was going to be my home. My grandfather loaned me the money for a down deposit on this property, thinking that one day, it might end up being a good investment. But with all of this stuff that has been, all of this, those houses there, and all this dust and all this noise and all the messes that's tore up my fence, it has been nothing but horrendous mess and very upsetting.
Thank you. Are there any questions, answers, or anything everybody has? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back up here for discussion. Does anybody have a question or a motion or a question?
Has the builder or developer of that area tried to resolve any of the issues that you have had?
No.
There's been no,
I called the man one time, he said they would be fix the fence. I tried calling back and nobody replied, so I figured
You're
that.
going to need to come back up to the microphone, ma'am. Thank you.
I called him on the phone and talked to him once, and they said that they would see about getting on the second, running into my fence, they said that they would see about getting it taken care of, and I've never heard one word back. I tried calling the number that I had again, and nobody answered, and nobody tried calling me back that I know of.
okay, the gentleman that's in charge of that is sitting in the row in front of you.
Well, that's what when I heard his name, that's what I figured.
So it might be advantageous for you guys to talk after our meeting tonight.
Because I can't imagine it. Anybody that I've talked to don't want to live where I live. They says, I would not want to live there. And I says, well, I'm the same way. I don't want to live there anymore either.
Well, the construction deal is temporary. I mean, when the houses are finished, the construction is going to be gone. You're not going to have additional dirt, congestion, whatever. And I think the drainage easement that has been put in, or will be put in, should accommodate the water flow, and you should not have additional water in your crawl space.
Well, that was put in for that on the west property. There was nothing that was put in under what was north of me. And it's like, that's completely covered. That the ground was raised there. And there's nothing pretty much but houses, but like a few little spots in between each one of those homes. I worry about when we didn't get a big, huge snow yet since the two properties behind me went in, which were more recent than the first three.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm worrying about those people shoving their snow over the little curbing and it coming into my yard, because it's like, well, there's, just grass there, no big deal. Well, it is a big deal when you have this crawl space, then when stuff melts and comes in, that's where it's going to go.
Well, but I think that they looked at the drainage easements, but,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any other questions? I would entertain I've already closed the hearing, so we'll entertain a motion for comments. We do no motion.
Chairman Haney,
Yes, sir.
I would move for approval of the vacation of VAC-04-18-6336 Hannah's Place, second plat, lots 10 through 14, with the two staff conditions.
With the two staff. Yes, sir. Do I hear a second?
Second.
To
Roll call vote.
That would be a roll call vote.
The hearing's over.
Yeah, the hearing's over. We'll do a roll call vote and then.
Yep.
Okay. Planning Commissioner Casey,
Aye.
Commissioner Graham,
Aye.
Commissioner Fairbanks,
I'm going to abstain.
Commissioner Sanderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Duhan,
Aye.
Commissioner Billups,
Aye.
Chairman Haney.
Aye.
Motion's been approved.
Okay, that is closed. We'll move on to public hearing vacation at Colonial Gardens.
Go ahead.
Okay. that has been opened. Staff report.
Mr. Chairman, I offer the following exhibits into the record. Exhibit 1, staff report with attachments. 2, affidavit of publication in the Examiner on April 7, 2018. 3, application with attachments. 4, 185-foot notification map. 5, names and addresses of property owners within 185 feet of the site. 6, copy of the letter sent to said property owners. 7, Title IV Land Use Section Blue Springs Code of Ordinances by reference. And 8, 2014 Comprehensive Plan by reference.
Here are the staff comments, please.
All right, thank you, Chairman Haney and Commissioners. Before you this evening are 2 requests related to Colonial Gardens. The first request is to vacate all the areas designated as landscape easements that are delineated and dedicated on Lot 1 of Colonial Gardens' first plat. It has become common practice to delineate and dedicate landscape easements on final plats to further define the required landscape buffer. However, after additional review of the UDC, staff has determined that a landscape easement is only required along street frontages where a limits of no access is required. A limits of no access is required along Southeast Wyatt Road, and therefore landscape easement is not necessary. The 2015 UDC also added flexibility in landscape buffers related to widths and design. A minimum 15-foot wide buffer is required along Southeast Wyatt Road as the property is zoned GB General Business. Through the 2016 site plan design review process of Colonial Gardens, a 25-foot wide terrace frontage design was selected and approved as the required landscape buffer and frontage type. Details of the landscape buffers are reviewed and approved through the site plan design review process and not the platting process, and therefore staff supports the vacation request, and moving forward we'll be limiting the landscape easement dedications on plats.
Bless you.
The primary reason requesting, I'll get into the site plan design review request now. The primary reason for requesting to vacate the landscape easements is driven by the PD final plan and site plan design review request. The 2016 site plan design review had shown the existing lap house, which is located between the 2 access drives along Wyatt Road, to be removed out of the 25-foot landscape easement. The removal of this portion of the lap house was conditioned with a site plan design review and was conditioned to be removed prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the remodeled garden center and addition to the garden center. As construction has progressed on the site, the applicant has determined that they would like to keep a portion of that lap house, which would cover slightly under 1,700 square feet of the 25-foot setback area, and would be located approximately 11.5 feet from the property line. So here are images of what that would look like. They are proposing to leave the lap house where it is remaining right now. Originally, the lap house was up right at the back of the power poles, but they have taken that back approximately 11.5 feet. The existing lap house is a legal non-conforming structure that was previously located along the front property line, but has since been cut back to where it is requested to remain as shown. The adjacent lap house and building to the east of this site were allowed to remain on the property line through the plan development process. However, they have cut this back to where it is not a site triangle issue for vehicles pulling in and out of the main access drive. And they have decreased the degree of nonconformity, which staff thinks is acceptable, given that this was and has been a legal nonconforming structure. The portion of the lap house that will remain within the 25-foot landscape buffer will generally be used as landscape features, including a mix of shade and fruit-producing trees that they'd like to put up along the front. Their landscape plan did show, I'll pull that up. This is the lap house here. They did show shade trees in the Lath House structure, and then quite a few of the smaller trees here on the front were labeled as apple trees. So they are proposing to have some fruit-producing trees, and then they also have kind of a grapevine feature there along the front. So staff does believe that that does meet the intent of the landscape buffer. They have the landscape plan that was approved. This revision to that landscape plan still meets the same number of plant units. So staff does believe that is acceptable. In terms of the building design, they have started kind of what that would look like. It's going to be all wood along the front. And then in two different sections, they will be cutting out windows with a shade cloth installed over those windows. So the building design and character is common in other garden centers and nurseries, so staff doesn't have any concerns with the architectural design of that. The PD final plan, site plan design review, is limited to just this Lath House and the adjacent landscaping along Southeast White Road. All other approved plans and conditions that have been previously approved still apply to the site. Staff does recommend approval of the vacation with the 2 conditions in the staff report, and also approval of the PD final plan, site plan design review with the 6 conditions in the staff report. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Hearing none, would the applicant like to step forward and make a comment?
Name and address again, please.
And you need your name and address, sir.
Yes, sir. Tory, T-O-R-Y, Swope, 2404 Northeast Lake Breeze Drive, Lee Summit, Missouri.
Okay, go ahead and swear him in. Yep.
You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I missed on the plan how far it was supposed to go back. We understood that it was supposed to move back 10 feet for site, and I guess we submitted it wrong. But the main thing that I guess we were focused on was maintaining the same look and feel of Colonial, just with an upgrade. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that our customers were going to be safe pulling in and out. I think we've got really good sight angles now, so that's about all I have. We stopped. We started construction not realizing that we were in the wrong place, and when we got inspected, we stopped. We did put the black material there. That's not permanent. That's just temporary, so that people can't just walk right in to our place.
Take your shrubs.
Is there any questions of the gentleman? Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Thank you for your
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience? I don't see an audience. In favor of this motion? Is there anyone against it? Seeing none, we'll bring it back up here for questions on the record. Okay, I will close the public hearing. It is closed. Does anybody have final comments up here? Motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I would move to recommend approval of VAC 04186338 with the 2 staff conditions.
The staff conditions, okay. That will be a second. Second, Commissioner Casey. Roll call vote.
Planning Commissioner Fairbanks.
Aye.
Commissioner Sanderson.
Aye.
Commissioner Duhan.
Aye.
Commissioner Billups.
Aye.
Commissioner Casey.
Aye.
Commissioner Graham.
Aye.
Chairman Haney.
Aye. That is passed, and will be heard at the council meeting on the May the 7th at 6 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I will.
Just vote on this
Right.
as well.
But it's not a public hearing.
Right. You don't have to.
Okay. Okay, and item 5 is the final plan and site plan review. Have any questions about it? I would entertain a motion, though.
Mr. Chairman, I would also move for approval of PDFS 04186339, final plan and site design review for Colonial Gardens Phase 1 with the 6 staff conditions.
6 applications.
I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Okay, we will move on. Other business. I think
No, we have to vote, sir, excuse me, can we vote on the minutes?
Right.
Go back to that.
Yeah, I'll get it.
Other business, there are 2 items I'd like to discuss with you. First, as for the next scheduled meeting, we currently have 1 item scheduled for the May 14th Planning Commission meeting. We may have an additional item that could come forward that night, which would have been an item that has been continued from previous Planning Commission meetings. The item that we do have is a de-annexation request for property up off of Pink Hill Road on the northern part of the city boundary. In addition, on Friday, staff sent out the draft capital improvement program budget for fiscal years 2018 to 19 to 2022-23. The capital improvement program covers a 5-year period. However, it is reevaluated and published every year to make sure that it is keeping up with changing needs. That draft was reviewed with the Capital Improvement Program Review Committee last week. That committee consisted of 2 planning commissioners, a parks commissioner, as well as representatives from city council and staff to go through specific projects. The draft was provided to you for your review, your knowledge, and to see if you had any questions or comments on it, which I'd be happy to take at this time, or if you'd like to provide those to me in an email or give me a call, I'm happy to take them as well. That is currently scheduled to go before City Council for their review and potential adoption on May 7th.
Very good. Does anyone else have any same comments to make? I will ask for a motion before the adjourn to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Got a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Now I think we're ready for adjournment. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.